Hi, what's up? So I want to take a video on prejudices and really why I think prejudice happens in society. And I'm not defining prejudice strictly as based on characteristics and maybe your race, your ethnicity, or your religion, or whatever. You know what I mean? That is included in prejudice, but it's not the only thing when I speak of prejudice. You know what I mean? Prejudice, I think, also includes just minor scuffles. You know what I mean? Just like getting in minor conflicts with people. Um, just conflict, in conflict of national, international, and personal sorts. And going back to the more traditional version of prejudice, I think we're all very acquainted with prejudice in the modern world. The world is neck and neck. I mean, there is tension, and everyone knows it's probably going to burst eventually, but I will do everything in my power as a personal individual to not let that happen, at least in my own life and people around me. I mean, world's pretty dark at the moment, yeah. I mean, it's like the guy in a pub told me the other day, the world's gone pretty crazy, and he's right. So, I obviously am pretty right wing myself. I watch a lot of right wing content, and that can be a very. I know the left calls it reactionary, but like it is but then the left's reactionary as well. Anyway, that aside, like all sides use prejudice against certain groups to advance their own political goals. But I'm more interested on a personal level, like why do we buy into these things? Yeah. So obviously, I think I've been unemployed for a few years now because I had a mental health crisis. If you watched my first video, I developed psychosis in 2020, and then I had one again in 2023 where I lost all my financial and self-image and well, I lost my head really, didn't I? Develop psychosis. I'd lost everything basically except for my family and a few very close friends, and I had to rebuild my life from there. So I had a lot of time to think about who I wanted to be and what I wanted to do. And have I gotten there totally? No, I'm still working there. Hence all the weight. I'm getting rid of that hopefully soon in the next few years. Um, but I did achieve a lot. I quit smoking. I had been smoking 40 to 60 cigarettes a day, and I achieved a lot of things personally in my life. And I started reading bunch of books to go all the way down there and up here. Like I just finished the Odyssey today. Actually, finished reading the Odyssey today, so I had a lot of time to think about self improvement. And obviously, I had the privilege. It sounds weird to call myself privileged in that position, but I did have a privilege. I had the privilege of time, and it made me think. So when your like husband or your wife or your kids or whatever come home and like you just don't want to hear it, why is that? It's because you don't have the energy, you know what I mean? And maybe you don't have the time because you've been working all day, you've been busy, or you've been bringing the kids to football, and then you've been, you're constantly busy, you're constantly using energy, and it's the same thing for all conflict, I think. And obviously, there's nuance. A lot of conflict is caused by just situations like the conflict with each other, like competing values and stuff. But the root of conflict, I think, the lack of understanding in the modern world, at least on I'd say 40 to 35 to 40% of issues is probably down to a lack of understanding based on shared energy and time. So think about it. Let's say, for example, I'm not that prejudiced against Muslims, but I run in right wing circles, and a lot of people are. So I would have probably maybe like bad assumptions about Islam, which I hope to dispel in my course. I'm going into a religious studies course, so I look forward to learning a lot more about Islam. And I have hadiths in the Quran on my shelf there. They were an interesting read. I quite enjoy them. But like, say you have a misunderstanding about the Muslim community that builds and builds internally until it becomes a prejudice. Um, I think in some cases even a hatred maybe. I don't know. I don't. It depends on the person. But if you don't have the time to make Muslim friends, you don't have the energy to circumnavigate your body's instant need for a gratifying answer or gratifying solution to the unimaginable question of nuance which plagues us all because it's so beyond natural instincts for humans, I guess. You know what I mean? So, I mean, if you don't have the time to read the Quran or read the Hadiths, I haven't read the Hadiths yet, and there's so many Hadiths, but I have read the Quran, And there's nothing in there that's worse than the Bible, and I'm a religious Christian, you know what I mean? And that's going to sound so controversial to people who've never read the Quran, but I mean, there's nothing worse in there than that's in the Bible. I've heard things about the Hadiths, maybe there is, I don't know, I haven't read them. But I think a lot of people who don't like Islam don't even know what a Hadith is. And I'm not saying that to say that people should be have one view on immigration or the other, and that's not my place. I have what I like to call sensible views on immigration, and well, fairly sensible. I think like strict control, but also some room for diversity. I think in immigration policy, you focus on integration will be the best solution, but I might come back to that in a minute. So obviously, back to the energy expenditure thing. If you don't have the energy and the time to pursue nuance on something, you're not going to, and you're not going to have a nuanced opinion on it. You know what I mean? I've had the intense luxury of being able to pursue knowledge for the last year, and I haven't always had the energy. When I've dedicated towards learning, and now it hasn't always been about maybe areas I'm ignorant on, but even just like the 12 books I read in a year. I'm guessing I read a book every 23 to 30 days. And like the amount of knowledge that has totally transformed my view on things, even just reading a fictional story like the Iliad, like how it illustrates human nature and how much humans have changed and how awful humans can be. I mean, you synthesize that like a Nietzsche, and then you look into like the Bible, and you're like, okay, well, have human God? People say that God couldn't be real because he's immoral in the Bible. It's like, well, if God created us, then would he be of the morality of a person of the 21st century? I'm not saying God's immoral. I'm not saying that I believe in Jesus as God, and he's clearly a very moral man in my opinion. But like, you also have to remember Jesus is the God of the Old Testament. That might sound weird to somebody who's not familiar with Christianity, but Jesus is the God of the Old Testament. Obviously, he does some things that are pretty uncomfortable. Yahweh does some things that are pretty uncomfortable in the modern world. But like when you start synthesizing all these things, like you begin to make a better picture of things, and I'm looking forward to learning a lot more going forward in the future. But things tend to you tend to see the connection of things a lot more, you know what I mean? And you tend to be like, even when you do have prejudices, you find yourself going, oh no, actually, like 20 minutes later, I was just in a state of lack of energy where I couldn't think logically about these things, so I resorted to ignorance. And I'm a bit familiar with ignorance myself. We all are. I think anyone who pretends they're not familiar with ignorance is lying to you. People on the left are just ignorant about things. People on the right are more familiar with, and people on the right are ignorant about things people on the left are people from certain minority groups more familiar with. There's a room for common understanding, and it's being crushed by our lack of time and our lack of energy. And like, I mean, I probably said some ignorant stuff in the last week. I mean, like, I'm sick of people pretending they're not ignorant. I mean, we've all said ignorant things. Not terrible things, but like oh, whatever. You know what I mean? Like, dismissive things, like even towards our own family members, towards our own friends. You know what I mean? Because we don't have the energy for other people and for each other and for learning, and also a lack of curiosity can be a big component in this. But I mean, curiosity requires time and energy. I mean, it requires like community and support and maybe encouragement, all of which are when you don't give someone around you encouragement, you might like not have the energy or the time to really dedicate yourself towards maybe broadening their horizons, and you can't even broaden your own. And why is all this? It's because we live in a very inhuman system that well, I'm not a socialist personally. Like, I mean, I tend to lean towards a mixed market economy, so like pretty much what Ireland had 20 years ago probably. Like probably at the start of the Celtic Tiger. I'm very pro business. I'm very pro small business. I think Japan does a great job of allowing small businesses to flourish out of people's homes and everything. And Japan doesn't have constant growth. You know, I mean, Japan survives as an economy without constant growth. We're all gonna have to learn from Japan as the population ages. And while I do support diversity and all that, we can't have infinite immigration, or you literally would just replace the whole population of the country. So you're gonna have to learn to cope with an elderly, aging population, non-eternal growth, all these sort of things. You know what I mean? Yeah. So I want to go back actually to the immigration question. I'll be bringing up immigration again. I think integration is the only way we can approach immigration. Now, I change my opinions on immigration from one day to the next, but people seem to either only speak of multiculturalism or assimilation, like the total eradication of the person's previous culture, or else even remigration, getting rid of all immigrants, which is very the ethical implications. Like I've probably supported that at points in my life, but like the ethical implications when you actually think about it are horrific. As we also about Trump's performative brutality in Minneapolis and Minnesota and all that, where he didn't even deport more people than Obama, he just made it look horrific as an institutional practice. And then on the other side, you have total multiculturalism, which is literally just balkanization of a country, of a city, of anywhere. It doesn't work. We know it doesn't work because it has never worked in anywhere in the world except for places with it does work. It works in Singapore, which is an authoritarian country. You know, I mean, it has a dictatorship which manages the ethnic groups in the country and makes sure like they have a certain number of ethnic people in one housing unit, and then in the next housing unit, and have so multiculturalism can work. It just can't work with the system we live in. And I'm not saying the Singaporean system is wrong. I'm not saying multiculturalism is wrong. I'm just saying within our current institutional frameworks, it's not going to work. So we need a third option. We need integration. We need to have a cultural exchange of sorts. People like I'm personally an Irish patriot. I consider myself very patriotic. In Ireland, we use the term nationalist. It doesn't have the baggage or the right-wing baggage that it has in other countries because we weren't an imperial power. And even though I do consider myself right-wing, I wouldn't consider my nationalism to be right-wing. So, so if you look at the Turks, for instance, the Turks come from Siberia and Central Asia originally. If you go to Turkey, they don't really look like a Central Asian person or Siberian person. In fact, if you go to the west of Turkey, they look fairly similar to Greek people. And if you go to the east of Turkey, they look fairly similar to Kurdish people. Now, it's going to be very controversial for some Turkish people to hear. And if you go to the south of Turkey, they look very similar to Arabic people. Because the Turkish people are not a race. They have fairly common ethnic origins. They have about 10% Turkish DNA. But they have a shared language. They don't even have the original religion they started off with. I mean, they started off with, I think, as Tengriism or something in Siberia and moved across Iran. They controlled Iran for a while and then settled in Anatolia. They've preserved culture and linguistics across genetic and religious changes. So no one would say the Turkish people are not Turkish. I mean, they're obviously Turkish. Same way, while a British person who's a nationalist might say that, like, a Pakistani British person is not British. I mean, and maybe someone in Ireland would say that about a Polish person from Ireland. When they beat someone from a foreign country, like if I meet a British Pakistani person, they're fairly British to me. You know what I mean? Our level of understanding of what. Anyway, I'm not going to get into that, but like, I'm not trying to be ignorant in this video. I'm just trying to have an open and honest dialogue, an honest conversation. So Turkey is a nation. It is fairly close. There's different ethnic groups within Turkey. There's there's like loads of different ethnic groups in Turkey, but there is a central Turkish identity, and obviously Turkey has done some bad things in its history. I'm not going to get into that, but I'm not downplaying that. But I don't know if Turkish rugs come from Iran, but I mean they're fairly similar. I don't want to downplay Turkish rugs, but like, they're fairly similar to the rugs in Iran. So they controlled Iran for a while. So maybe they pick up the rugs there. The Turkish coffee, maybe that has some dialogue with Arabic coffee, but like the hammam spas, the Turkish barber things, it has its own distinct and cohesive cultural identity that separates it from maybe a Greek or a Bulgarian or an Austrian or an Iranian or a Lebanese person, you know what I mean? So we should be aiming for a nationhood which integrates parts of the immigrant cultures that have come in and also shares, they adopt some of our culture, and it's a cultural exchange. And it's like a dialectical synthesis, right? So you have your thesis, your antithesis. You need a synthesis. What the left is trying to do is have an antithesis and a thesis. What the right is trying to do is have a thesis. But you need an antithesis, you know what I mean? Sorry, speaking, and that's my loose understanding of philosophy. I've done a philosophy course at a community college for the last year, so that's that's one thing I picked up. Well, I picked up a lot of things, but we have a lot of dialogue. So I'm getting excited now. So like these things are just kind of obvious when you like actually think about them, and yeah, like you can't have a country that's balkanized, and you can't have a country that is eternally stagnant, yearning for a glorified past, because you need to move forward. I'm not saying you need to adopt AI or adopt every new technology that comes your way that's potentially destructive, but like you need to progress forward And that doesn't mean you have to be abandon all tradition. I think the idea of abandoning all tradition, tradition is the key word related to tradition in my mind, is stability, and the world needs something stable right now. That God knows it does. So yeah, that's just my opinion, and I'll leave it there. I probably could develop these ideas a lot further, but I'm already at 15 minutes. So yeah, hopefully you find some use in that.